Welcome, everyone, to What the Force, and welcome to a new discussion all about the power of myth and story and how Star Wars is actually helping us heal from certain things that happen in our lives. And joining me today is my friend Dominic Kolchar, who I met at Star Wars Celebration in Chicago. Welcome, Dominic.
Hi, everyone.
And where are you? Because I think that people would be interested in knowing like where you're physically located.
I'm located in Bratislava, in Slovakia, in the Central Europe.
Mm-hmm. And we're connecting because the story is actually kind of funny, but we had arrived and I had to pick up some stuff from Will Call. And so Ty was wandering around, Ty Black, who is, the co-host of Power of Myth and Symbolism. And she was wandering around and looking at the celebration poster, the big one that was on the wall. And she was talking to a friend. And you said...
Basically, because I've noticed that giant mural that was basically put up on the wall, and the section with Rebels with Thrawn in it. The Thrawn just looked like Pierce Brosnan, like literally. And there was this girl standing, and she was just looking at the picture just as I was.
Yeah.
I came up to her and I was like, "Is it just me, or does he really look like Pierce Brosnan?" She was like, "Yeah, he totally does." And so we just started chatting. And she mentioned a podcast that she's doing research on Joseph Campbell. And I was like, "Wait a minute, Joseph Campbell, what podcast are you on?" And she was like, "Oh, What the Force?" And I was like, "Holy shit, like, I'm your listener." It was like completely out of blue. I didn't expect it because I was on my way to the hotel because I was also at the Wilco picking up my stuff, like the shirt. And basically I was just like, I'm just going to stop and just look at the mirror once more, and it just happened.
Yeah, and we ended up hanging out a fair amount during celebration and like having lunches and dinners and stuff like that together, which was so much fun.
It was awesome.
I'm so glad that you made the trip out to North America and came to Star Wars Celebration, because we've been kind of friends ever since, which is so much fun.
Yeah, it's incredible.
And then you and I have been talking about doing philosophy specifically, and we will probably get to that eventually, but this kind of talks about, in some ways, kind of the philosophy of why story and myth helps us. So specifically, you were like, well, if we're not going to do philosophy, why don't we listen to Theater of War? And I'm like, what's that? Theater of War is a book that was written by Brian Dories, who specialized in Greek, Roman, and Hebrew, basically translation for the longest time. He was trying to...
He was studying philology.
Yes, philology. And he ended up kind of... And it goes into it in the book, and in the audio book itself, it's read by Adam Driver. So that in and of itself is like supremely entertaining. But the book itself is wonderful. And it walks you through Brian's experiences, both on a personal level as well as with this program, the Theater of War, that was brought in to help, enlisted people, veterans who are dealing with traumatic situations, like all over the US, as well as...
Also the whole world, basically.
Yeah, a whole world. And it's expanded since then.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of hard to quantify without having listened to the book, because it is so emotionally driven. Everything that he does is from a deep place of wanting to help others, as well as the emotions and feeling of compassion for people that experience a deeply harming trauma. And I have a great deal of respect for this man. I also have a great deal of respect for Adam Driver. And at one point during the audiobook, because I listened to it, Adam Driver says, and participating was actor Adam Driver. And he's the one who's reading it, which is kind of a chuckle moment. But for the most part, there's a lot of ups and downs with the audiobook. It is deeply emotional, and he talks through how the ancient plays of Sophocles and the other Greek tragedies, Euripides, are like almost a form of collective technology that helped at that time, helped people heal from mass trauma to their collective psyches, as well as deep invisible wounds from that trauma. And so this is the setup of the topic by which we're going to talk about, which is why myth, especially our modern day myth, Star Wars, and how it does it, is actually helping people heal from invisible trauma. And we're going to go into that in a little bit. But how did you feel about the book, Dominic?
I was very emotional. Basically, I found the book because of one of the metas. I think it was from 2015, 2016 on Tumblr. It was by user MS Qualia. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing this correctly, so I apologize. It was basically, the meta is called Moral Injury, Tragedy, and Kylo Ren. And basically, that's how I got to the book, because it dealt with this whole topic of moral injury, tragedy, how Kylo Ren relates to those ancient tragedies. And there's a passage quoted from the book of Theatre of War by Brian Bowies. I was looking for the book, and I found the audio version. And when I saw it's read by Adam Driver, I just had to get it.
I think it was a thoughtful choice. Adam Driver also participates in Theatre of War. And I think especially with his own charity organization that brings, performance to soldiers.
Yes.
It also is a reflection that he understands the work too that Brian is doing.
Yes, I think also Brian at some point was a member of the board on the Art of the Armed Forces that Adam founded.
So they have a close relationship, and you can kind of hear it in the book itself. So I definitely recommend that you go and either listen to the audiobook or read the book itself. You will get something out of it. We're going to kind of call out different aspects from that book, but this is the lens by which we are going to be talking about kind of Star Wars, as well as some of the works themselves that Brian brings to the forefront. And Brian is deeply personal in the Theatre of War book. He talks about how the love of his life, he basically had to watch her die, and how much that had affected him, and how his work with Theatre of War helped him process what had happened to him, and how he now kind of sees the world differently through the lens of the works that were created so long ago.
Because also one of the driving motivations behind this quest of his, he needed to talk to anyone who would listen about this, because the encounter with death changes you on a fundamental level, and you have to relay that experience to anybody who would listen. And as he was talking to his relatives and friends, they all, after a time, they didn't want to hear it, because you don't want to hear about trauma. So he was just looking for opportunities to express himself and trying to find others who felt the same way he did.
And I think that one of the, heartbreaking things about war and the soldiers that do a service for our countries, they are part of an organization, is that there are not just physical wounds. There are deep psychological wounds that happen. And in many times they happen more often when the people that are serving for a cause do not feel that that cause is just or worthy, or feel like maybe there's a dissonance between what they thought they were doing and what they actually are doing.
Yes.
And Brian goes into that as a deep sense of betrayal. And it can be a betrayal of your own personal values. And until you can kind of realize the middle path between what is reality and what has happened to you, you're going to feel like these invisible wounds that you can't seem to process. And many people in those situations, because they cannot pull those two things together, what has happened to them and what they thought should happen, end up experiencing ongoing symptomatic trauma. They shut down, they lash out. it's all within that can happen. And I just want to say, like, this is a very serious topic, but it goes down to every human, no matter their circumstances, when they feel betrayed, experiences this. It doesn't necessarily take a war to experience this. This can happen within your own household.
Yes, this can happen to anyone. Essentially.
Yeah. And Dominic, you shared a story with me a little bit, like that Kylo helped you wrap your head around, like, things that had happened with your father. Would you mind sharing that?
Yes, basically how should I put this? Basically, my relationship with father is momentarily, well, we're not talking to each other. Basically, I'm trying to divorce myself completely from him, as far as I can, because basically my father, whether I think he realizes it, but he's trying to, his own narrative is that of he never did anything to me, he never hurt me. But that's a lie, because I'm still dealing with the emotional baggage and the emotional trauma he caused me over basically my entire childhood.
This is where we have to talk about story in kind of a larger way, because the point of these myths that Brian Dories calls out is to say that through the different stories that he presents, it allows people who have experienced trauma, who have experienced difficult things that have betrayed them in the past, to see it played out, and for them momentarily to have somebody, speak the words, express the emotions of the moment, talk about it from a different angle, and gives that person a new lens by which to view the story. And this is quite a common thing that we hear from all sorts of different people, that especially Kylo Ren ends up taking on almost this ink blot type role within the story. And we're going to get into that in a little bit more detail as well, with specific examples. Mm-hmm. But many people look at, like, him and will project either that he is a monster or that he is a victim. And, people who have experienced, trauma tend to see him as a victim. People who have maybe been victimized and closed themselves off almost see him like their victimizer. And I want to acknowledge that that's all okay. All of those different aspects are okay. It's okay to, like, feel one way or another about a character. It's fiction. It's supposed to help you see the aspects within yourself that you're not actually, sharing out there and you're avoiding. It's part of your subconscious. It's like our shadow. It's the trash that we're carrying around.
And you also, even if you want to share them, you can't share them because you don't have the language for it, because you don't know how to express what has happened to you.
Because things are deeply emotional that live there, right?
Yes.
Brian Dories, through the course of Theatre of War, talks about how these ancient tragedies are very much like a form of technology that helps people see aspects of, what they have experienced almost in a new form directly out there. And, he says where the theater was placed in ancient Greece was actually right next to also, like, where the healers lived in ancient Greece. And in that, the theater was part of the healing process for either collective trauma or for trauma related to the experiences that people would go through. So that's one thing. We also know a little bit more about, how psychological these myths actually are. So I recently picked up a copy of the Star Wars Magic of the Myth book written by Mary Henderson, and I highly recommend you pick it up if you have not had an opportunity. It's basically like the original published meta of how myth and Star Wars are interconnected and intertwined, and how they tie directly to the aspects of Star Wars and how these things have been told before. She actually uses the hero's journey to outline the different aspects of the original trilogy and shows the parallel myths along the way and how Star Wars has really incorporated those things. So I'm just going to read a quote from Mary Henderson. When Joseph Campbell maintained that all mythic stories draw on a common store of images and symbols, he was, in part, referring to the work of psychiatrist Carl Jung and his theory of archetypes. He believed that certain psychological urges and instincts manifest themselves in fantasies and reveal their presence through symbolic motif. These forms or images occur practically all over the work as contents of myths, as forms that rise out of the unconscious mind in dreams and myths. Archetypes appear as characters, princes, knights, wizards, dragons, and fools, who help or hinder the hero on the path of enlightenment. Or they may appear as archetypical images. As we watch the conflict unfold, we find germs of meaning that can help us make sense of our own lives. Okay.
That's a beautiful quote.
Oh, so I skipped a little bit of a chunk in the middle and kind of truncated it. So taking kind of the paraphrase of this very long introduction. But the point is, myth is helping us speak our unconscious. What we hold inside that we cannot look at because it is too hard to look at. It helps speak what we cannot say.
And it helps us with finding the things we're looking for.
Yeah. So, what Brian Dories is doing is, living the myths in front of people who've experienced trauma's eyes. And, what Star Wars is doing is re-upping these mythological motifs and ideas for a new generation to make them relevant for today. Cool.
It's really good. It's really cool.
It is really cool. And it's specifically calling on these things that will make sense to our deeper, make meaning of deeper things that are happening within us. So how you experience story, and Ty and I have talked about this a fair amount, just one-on-one, is that we both process things in our own lives through the stories that we experience. And that's why I want to say, experiencing and reading story is good. Experiencing story is important. Experiencing story is how we as humans understand ourselves.
Yes.
It is our mirror to ourselves. When you go to therapy and you're speaking with your psychologist, they ask you to talk about yourself. And what you end up doing is telling stories about yourself.
Yes.
The story itself is so fundamentally important because our brains try to categorize what it is experiencing.
And sometimes when for example, in therapy, and your therapist is asking you questions about yourself, and for example, you're trying to deal with a certain situation, and basically you can't find words. For me personally, it helps when I try to describe a situation from another story. Basically, I can project myself on that story and somehow see the trajectory of the character in that story in me. See myself through the eyes of the character and then understand better what I'm doing and what I did.
And it allows you to have a meta analytical perspective on your own brain without necessarily knowing that you're doing it. Yes. So using story and how many women I know identify very closely with Kylo Ren. They identify with Rey too, which is really, really fascinating. But I think that it's really interesting when people are like, no, I get Kylo Ren is trapped. I just find that very fascinating.
Yeah, he's living in his own personal hell, much like his grandfather before him.
Yeah, exactly. And how the tragedy of Anakin and Padme is a very, very important story to understand. And, I have gone into this before with Ty, how talking about the prequels, and how the parallels to Greek tragedy are very, very clear. as well as the tragic nature of film noir and how it creates this sense of the things aren't right about the world around you. We've talked a lot about kind of trauma, etc. And like, yes, these are extreme circumstances that people experience this. I want to pivot just briefly before kind of getting into the why this is important, just for kind of people living their everyday lives, because everybody experiences suffering, and it just kind of depends on, like, you know, how much. So Dominic, from a philosophical perspective, like, humanity and to live is to suffer.
Yes.
Yeah. Like,
yes,
and I hate to be kind of depressing about this, because I think that it's just, you know, there is a lot of joy in life, and I personally like very much align to the George Lucas seek joy. I've subscribed to that way of thinking because it helps me continuously lean into the light. But when you go and you know, read philosophy from the beginning of when we had writing, and you listen to what those philosophers were saying, is that they fundamentally understand from an existential basis that we are all suffering until we die.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that?
Sure, we can talk.
This is kind of leaning into your degree.
Yeah.
A little bit.
I majored, basically my diploma thesis was on Albert Camus, and this was essentially the crux of my work. Basically, world is suffering, if world is misery, and basically how do you deal with the suffering? How do you cope with it? Like, Camus' thesis was just beautiful because it was his first philosophical essay, The Myth of Sisyphus. He actually opens the book with a sentence: "The only true philosophical problem is the problem of suicide." Basically, whether it's worth living or not is the only serious philosophical problem that we should be dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's like such a crazy, like, whoa.
It's a crazy idea at first.
Yeah, and like the idea that everybody around you and in some ways is affected by you is also a hard one to wrap your heads around, good or bad.
Because we basically, all of us, influence each other in a direct or indirect way. And we are all living, but at some point in your life, you're going to realize the absurdity of it all. Basically, the daily repetition, the same activities you're doing. You're going to work, you're going to school, you're just getting up, going to sleep. It's every day the same. And at one point in one day, you just wake up and you're like, what's going on? Like, is this really what life is about? Is all? And it's like the ear call to authenticity, like call to action. And from a hero's journey's perspective,
is this all? Yeah, and it's in a musical, it would be called the I Want song. Like, I want something different about my life. I want to find meaning. And I'm watching The Good Place, which, if you have not watched, you should. And we're actually watching it from the beginning with our kids, and we talk about the episodes afterwards, because there is some semi-adult situations in The Good Place. But I felt like the meta understanding of philosophy and ethics was more valuable than necessarily, you know, concern about my children's eyes, ears, you know. It's nothing so extreme that, you know, we can't talk about it. And in the second season, Michael, who is the architect of The Good Place, experiences a sense of existential dread at the thought that he might be eternally destroyed, i.e., he realizes that he could die. And he goes through the very, you know, existential crisis, i.e., you know, what is meaning in life? It is all pointless. We are all heading towards death. And
yeah, we are born to die.
We are born to die. And, you know, the only two sure things are death and taxes.
Yes.
And how he gets through it is basically by attempting to process his trauma. It's really only the length of an episode that he kind of experiences the subplot, but he's trying to put it all into context. And he realizes through the course of that episode itself is that the only way that he can actually, go on is by attempting to help others around him.
Yes.
Fascinating.
That's one great way to go about your life when you realize this, because basically that's one of the realities of humanity. Basically, humans are mortal, and you have to deal with that. But also the underlying part of it, the more important part of it, is that not just that other people are going to die. It's the question of I am going to die.
Yes.
And when you realize this, that I'm going to die, what are you going to do?
What are you going to do with the time that you have?
Yes. You're going to spend your life, the rest of your life, living fully, or are you just going to try to push this question, this underlying, this existential dread? You're trying to put it somewhere in the closet, somewhere away, trying not to look at it.
And I used to joke that I kept myself busy with hobbies to avoid existential dread, which is slightly true, because I can only process it at certain times when I'm feeling mentally strong enough to do that, to think about it and to understand what my place in the universe is. And part of what I try to live is with a feeling of compassion towards others. And then I understand that my energy that I put out there is valuable and is more important than just my own self. And that helps me.
Yes, it's actually the same for me, because one of the things that helped me to get to this place is that basically when I realized that I'm suffering, I'm in misery, and basically others around me are feeling the same thing. What I can do is try to reduce the suffering that they're going through. Basically, misery breeds compassion, I would say.
Yeah, and that, everyone around you is also experiencing life, life being the state of suffering. And when you can understand that, you can empathize with their situation, because you too have also experienced extreme suffering at some point in your life. And that is understanding the energy of others. That is how you build compassion to others, is that you understand that you are also the same and in the same situation.
Exactly.
So this is a good pivot to actually talk about fate. And I want to talk about fate both in the Greek and mythological term, as well as I want to talk about it from a Star Wars perspective. Fate is such an interesting thing. Brian Dories goes into it so well. Dominic, do you want to kind of talk about what he said about fate?
Sure. Well, basically, what Brian is saying in the book is that the way the Greek understood the fate, they understood it as basically the Greeks viewed fate as a god, basically the ancient god that's above all the other gods, on Olympus, for example. And everything in the universe, everyone in it, even the gods, even humans, they're all subject to its laws. And basically, fate and free will are tied together, because fate and free will are not mutually exclusive, because you need one to fulfill the other. Because your fate for how do you say this?
Well, what I really found fascinating was how he put into perspective something that I had struggled with, especially in Star Wars, which is that, how can you have free will if everything is predetermined, right? And fate itself is the cards that you are dealt.
Yes.
So a real life example of somebody having fate is I have asthma. I get asthma attacks when exposed to certain things. I get asthma attacks when I exercise. That is my fate. That is who I am. Some people have heart disease. Some people have diabetes from when they were born. Some people have genetic disorders. Some people have predispositions to certain things genetically.
Yes.
That is their fate. And Brian talks in the book about how the fate that he has experienced through his father, his father had diabetes, and his father viewed fate and what he had been dealt as something that he could not change or could not say learn to live with, learn to understand.
His position was very nihilistic because basically the way his father saw fate was very fatalistic, because basically fate is something you set in stone and you can't do anything to avoid it.
Exactly.
And basically there's nothing you can do to avoid certain things.
Whereas we know that people who either have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, if they take care of themselves, if they, eat correctly, if they
exercise, regulate their sugar levels with insulin,
if they take care of themselves, they can live full and complete lives, regardless of the cards that they were dealt, regardless of their fate, regardless of what fate says about them. That active free will and action actually creates your true destiny.
Yes, because, for example, if you have diabetes, you can sort of take the resigned stance and don't take care of yourself, don't exercise, continue eating junk food, don't take your insulin shots when you're supposed to, and you're going to die a lot quicker. Your symptoms are going to get worse a lot quicker than for those who, for example, do the opposite thing. They exercise, they take care of themselves.
Exactly. And this ties to Star Wars in such a really interesting way. In both Anakin being given the fate of being the chosen one,
yes,
and Kylo Ren being the fate, given the fate of being the ancestor and, heir apparent to Darth Vader. Both of them have been given fate.
Yes.
That they can either choose to live up to, or, circumstances can fall for them. And it's very, very hard to live up to the concept and the idea that you are supposed to be perfect. And It's also incredibly hard to leave the concept that you're supposed to be bad. Like, can you imagine if, I have a good friend who very much identifies with Kylo Ren, who her father actually went to prison. And it's like, can you imagine how to get over that, being like, oh, my father did this? How do you see yourself through a different lens that you can say, well, that's not going to be my fate?
Yeah, you can do everything in your abilities to avoid that.
Yeah. And that's the free will in Star Wars. And even though there are these prophecies and visions of the future, Yoda tells us that always in motion is the future. It's always moving, because humans are deciding on whether their fate, the force, the thing that binds the universe together is going to actually, rule them, if they're going to go along with what the force wants, or if they are going to, do what is compassionate, what is good, etc. What is compassionate not only to the society around them, but also compassionate to themselves. That's really key, is like, how do you treat yourself good?
It's about the intention, what you do, because for somebody like Vader or Kylo, basically, you have fate. They're fated, like Anakin is fated to be the chosen one, and Kylo is fated to be Vader's descendant, essentially. Mm-hmm. And it's up to them, how do they deal with this legacy, with this baggage that essentially they're carrying the world on their shoulders, especially in Anakin's case, because his whole life he's been led to believe, or he's been raised in a way that he's going to one day bring balance to the Force, and it brings a huge pressure on a person.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And this kind of brings us to, fate is this almost universal expectation, but it could be down to just the individual expectations that people have on each other. Who they're going to be, what they're going to be is also fate. What my parents think of me, and can I live up to that expectation, or even should I live up to that expectation? Fate is just, the universe's pressures on us, big or small, even our own pressures on ourselves. And that creates the dichotomy by which we end up feeling when things don't go the way that we think they should, or that, have been outlined for us, the sense of betrayal when they don't. So an example would be that Brian Dory's gives within the book is that many soldiers that go to war who are given, perhaps not the best orders, but still end up needing to follow them, or feeling betrayed by their country or by their commanding officer. Sometimes when soldiers are forced to do things that they personally feel is against their personal code of ethics, they end up feeling betrayed internally and end up having almost these psychological wounds. And it's past PTSD, because that is also something, the experience of trauma to do with the horrors of war is also like a different layer. But what these soldiers end up suffering from is almost this cognitive dissonance between who they think they should be and what they've ended up doing.
It's the thing they're going through is very insidious, you could say.
Oh, nice word. Yeah.
It's this insidious injury you suffer because it's basically, you could even say with PTSD, it's a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. Like you're supposed to kill somebody in a field of battle. Like, how do you react to that? Like, killing people should not be normal. Is not normal. So how do you respond to it? When people come away from the situation with trauma, you can't blame them for that.
And one of the things that Star Wars specifically does, even for kids, is show, in some ways, the suffering of the galaxy. The Star Wars is the eternal suffering of the galaxy reflected on screen. And like, people are literally dying all over the place in Star Wars.
Exactly.
One thing that Brian says is like, you need to see death up close and personal to see it and be able to connect with it in some ways. And you had this great quote, which was, "Death is an opportunity just like birth for generating deeper levels of connection." It always made me feel weird, why, this is Star Wars is for kids. Why does Star Wars have so much death, peril, tragedy in it?
To show the truth.
Yeah.
It's just like the soldier in Brian's book says, it's the truth. And we're all seeing it, we're all experiencing it, we are all living through it. Because people die every day around us.
Yeah. And even though it is, a space fairy tale, a family soap opera, a Western in space, a Kurosaki film, it's all of these things, but what it's telling you is the truth about humanity. It is hard to live in the normal world. It's okay that it's hard, and acknowledging that it's hard is important, because it helps you process those feelings that maybe you haven't been feeling. And I was really trying to put this into perspective for myself. When Dominic brought up this idea, I'm like, why does Star Wars, this modern day myth, this story about life and death, basically, stories of a generation, why does it resonate so strongly with not only children, which it is for, but also adults of kind of any age? And it's because adulthood is one of the first traumas that people experience. And it's because we as humanity don't tell the truth to our children about how hard life is, because we want to protect them.
Yes.
We want to treat them in this soft way, everything's going to be rainbows and sunshines and roses.
We lie to them for their own good.
We lie to them because we think that that's what they need. And yes, we want to say, the thing is, so the first betrayal that many people experience, if they haven't already been betrayed by people around them at a younger age, and that kids who have experienced trauma end up being more adults than some of the adults around them.
Yes, because they realize the reality. The
reality is the suffering.
Yes.
The Star Wars. The first betrayal that many people experience is that adulthood is not what we were told. it would be. It is the first betrayal of our society, that when we are adults, it is not easy, sunshine, roses. You may, be like, oh, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to go to school and it's going to be easy. And then you realize it's not easy. You get a job and you realize that it's incredibly hard to hang on to that job, or,
Yes.
People are out to get you, or, you don't even know why they don't like you, or, you're trying to start a family and for some reason you can't.
You don't have the means for it. You don't have the means, you don't have the time, you don't have the opportunities.
Or physically, your fate is that you can't. And how heartbreaking that is, that you were told by your parents your whole life, oh, when are you going to have kids? And I want grandbabies. And life is a betrayal of what we experience in childhood when they're trying to protect us. And betrayal is one of the deepest wounds that humans can experience. It is worse in some ways than other wounds for many people. And we can understand this through the lens of Star Wars, with what ends up being Anakin's downfall is that he feels betrayed by not only the Jedi, but also the Republic. And it forces him, from his perspective, to take drastic means in an attempt to control it.
Exactly, because to add to your point, because we're all terrified. People are terrified of living, of the existence, and the way we're trying to protect children, the younger generations, by not trying to keep the fear as far away from them for as long as we can. But as we try to prolong this, we try to delay this, it's harder for them. It's worse when I get to it. When I get to that point when they actually encounter it, the reality of existence.
So why do we have so much death, destruction, suffering in Star Wars? Is for children to maybe get a taste of it, get the grains, the germ of meaning of, what? Life is hard. Life is hard. And it's okay to acknowledge that life is hard.
Yeah, and it's okay if you feel hurt and you feel disillusioned. It's okay to feel that, because it's a normal response.
And actually, denying that disillusionment and saying, putting on a smile is actually just burying that pain deeper. And that's where it festers and grows. An ignored shadow, we know, is something that grows. And that causes us to disconnect with those around us. Okay. How does story, especially Star Wars, help us move past this? Understand our existence. Understand how we need to, get through each day.
How to live.
How to live, yeah.
How do you go on? How do you carry on?
What do you think, Dominic?
For me personally, how Star Wars helped me is eventually it showed me, I'd say I'm probably the reality of it all. Like the certain situations, like the feelings of betrayal, feelings of the moments of friendship and happiness and misery, and this whole facet, this multi-spectrum of experiences. It has showed me all of this. And basically, for me, it helped me even more because my parents, just like for Kylo, his parents were not really there for him when he needed them. And my parents too, they were not there for me when I needed them. So basically, I had no one to turn to, no one to show me how life goes on, how it goes on, like friendships, or like compassion to people, like listening to people. Actually, how does it work? The compassion, the focus more on others, not just on yourself. And basically, I found this through the Star Wars, because the stories of the characters showed me the situations, and they taught me things I needed to learn from parents, but I didn't.
Star Wars has helped me kind of on a variety of levels. So understanding that Star Wars is telling us that life is suffering. Acknowledging that was actually a really key thing for me. Just being like, oh man, life is hard. I think one of the hardest things for me personally is getting up in the morning. I delay it as long as possible. And I know some people are morning people, and this has changed because I used to just jump out of bed and do that. But I think that's one of the things that has been the hardest thing for me. Understanding that in Star Wars, it's telling you in a meta way, in the motifs that play out, that connecting with others, understanding the force of others, having compassion for others is the way that you find deeper meaning in yourself. Understanding that when you give yourself over to loving others and loving those around you, you affect those lives and you make those lives better, has given me, in some ways, like an odd sense of spirituality. Because that's what the Force is. It's compassion for those around you. And through the lens of Star Wars, it's telling you that in a grand and wonderful fiction.
Yes, and I would say it basically gives you the strength to carry on.
And it's also enjoyable. That's also a
exactly.
thing. I really love the story. And that's also something that like helps me put things into like life terms for myself. You know, the lessons of Star Wars are something that I never give up and never think about.
Like, for example?
Hope. That hope is not something that is useless. Hope is something that helps me think that things can be better, that we can, turn towards the light as humanity. Because, like, especially things in North America have been, and other places in the world, extremely dour in the last couple of years.
My country as well.
And it's like, well, do you just kind of throw up your hands in a nihilistic way, like Brian Dory's dad, who just kind of gave into diabetes and let it like basically rip apart his body? Or do you say, no, I have hope that things can be better and I will do my best to make it happen in whatever small part that I can play to make the world a better place? Because then I'm bigger than me. I am helping others experience love. And it's not about the illusion of, happy stories and everything is perfect. It's actually about the hope of the next generation that things can be better. The hope of Star Wars is incredibly important. The understanding that we ourselves affect everything else in our whole sphere of influence, but also that everything in the universe is connected to everything else and everything else that will ever be. When we die, we're not destroyed. We're turned into, different matter and energy, and that affects things as we go on. No one's ever truly gone.
Yes, that's a beautiful one. But also I would add hope depends a lot on your faith, your the willingness to believe, because like you say, you can hope that things will be better with each generation, but the thing is you don't have the guarantee. All you can really do is believe, have the faith that things will be better.
And act to make things better.
Yes.
But
and even despite not having the guarantee that things will turn out better, it gives you the resolve to do things despite the lack of guarantee. You do things, try to make the world a better place.
Hope is like the sun. Also a really great quote. Hope is like the sun. If you only believe in it when you can see it,
you'll never make it through the night.
You'll never make it through the night. Yeah. It's hard. The stuff that we've just discussed is very hard.
It is.
I would say that a lot of people identify with Rey as especially from a feminine perspective and her own journey. Women especially feel a lot of value from seeing her story and her intense, almost emotional isolation in not being understood. Because in some ways, that's another betrayal of our society, is how we treat women ongoing. And I know, Dominic, you might not be able to contribute to this part of it very much, but like one of the things I've been really struggling with in fandom especially, but also just in seeing the women around me who are brilliant. I've had many of them on the show, and they're talented and they think about things in incredibly interesting and valuable ways. And I've approached a few of them to be like, oh, do you want to talk about this on the podcast? Or, maybe you should write something and put it out there so that, people can read your words. And something that is deeply ingrained in female psychology, from a young age, and I totally blame the patriarchy, not men, the fact that the institutions themselves are lean towards masculinity, is that every single one of them tells me that they do not feel worthy enough to do it. And that in and of itself is a realization. And at some point, they're going to feel absolutely betrayed because they are worthy. I've proven it by having them on the podcast. They have valuable insight. They know what they're talking about, but for some reason, they don't feel like they're worthy of putting those words out there. And that is a deeply fundamental, institutional-wide betrayal by our society on women. And so Rey attempting to go through her heroine's journey deeply is important. It's so important that we see her go through her journey and live and understand herself and her place in the galaxy.
Rey is amazing in this, because I can also relate to this feeling of not being worthy and not feeling worthy enough, because this is part of the things that really resonate with me, not just with Rey, but with Kylo especially, because it's that feeling of betrayal from whether it be the patriarchal figures or even your friends and relatives. And there are certain expectations put on you, but you don't understand why they are there, why you have to do it. When you're trying to forge your own path, you're blamed for not doing what they wanted you to do.
Yep. And then you're also treated like, if you end up kind of living in their world, you're never good enough in your own perspective. And you feel like that's what the imaginary boon of success is that sense of betrayal to who you truly are, even though you tried to play along with their rules.
And it's, to again use the word, it's insidious, because even if you actually try to, like Ryan described this beautifully with Kylo, basically Kylo is a metaphor for people going through the adulthood, the anger of adolescence.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, even when you're trying to forge your own path, making your own decisions. Like, for example, I moved out recently. Basically, for the first time in my life, I moved out. I live in a different city. I found a new job, but still every day I wake up and I feel, and you probably heard this before, but I feel like a failure. Like I go to work. I'm trying to make money, trying to pay my rent, and it's not just about work. It's about also in my studies, in my philosophy. Like I applied to doctoral training, but I didn't pass the entry exam, and it's basically the entry interview. And like I took it, I've seen it as an okay, but also I accepted this reality that okay, it didn't work out. But I was also presented with the opportunity to try it in a different city, in a different university. But basically, I didn't fully realize it then, but I didn't believe myself to be worthy and skilled enough to do it. So I told myself, I'm going to try this again next year. But it's that feeling of not being good enough, not being worthy and not being skilled enough. It's still there. It never leaves. And the only thing I can do is just carry on despite that. And like you said, have hope and believe that one day, someday, things are going to work out well, not just in work, in studies, but in relationships as well.
And it's very hard to look past what has been presented to us. That's why we need story and fiction and heroes that take up the example for us and are able to actually live through it and get through it, and through all of the trials and the struggles and the disillusionment are able to succeed.
Yes, the different path, because you go through one experience and it's a negative experience, and it's very easy to see that experience as the only experience possible. But the stories actually, they show you the possibility, they show you the different layers, the different paths, the things that could have gone differently. And this is what's beautiful about Star Wars, for example.
Because of the ring theory, especially, it tells the story from multiple angles and multiple experiences. It tells the story again and again and again and again to give you hope and understanding that it is in the tries, it is in the stamina, it is in the continuous trying again that hope lives.
And it's really cathartic, because this is the one thing that Brian said, basically when he talked about his father in the book, and he presented this beautiful example of this theory, the theory of negative reinforcement. Basically, what his father, he taught psychology, and he basically taught his students. He showed them an experiment with rats. Basically, he put rats in a cage and put certain levels. He fired electricity on the floor. And basically, after some tries, the rats they gave up. They just surrendered to the electricity and they died. And it's this. And if you're going through these negative reinforcement over and over again in your life, basically your experiences and your life, I would say, life situations are always negative from one situation to another, and you always end up with the same result. It's very powerful and beautiful and cathartic to see the similar situation or similar character in a story breaking through that barrier, actually achieving something that you couldn't. And it gives you the hope that one day maybe my situation is going to turn out differently in the past.
Exactly. And I don't want to leave people in a depressing state, because I know that this episode has probably been very hard for some people, and it's okay. It's okay to take a step back and, go and read your favorite book, watch your favorite movie, because that's also important. Is it allows our brains to rest from our normal lives. That's incredibly powerful, is to live through somebody else's life for a little while. But Star Wars is helping you not only by being your favorite movie and your favorite situation, but also by helping you see yourself differently through a different lens.
You can remember yourself differently.
Remember yourself differently, just like Osiris. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Nothing comes to mind right now.
Okay.
I'm still processing all of this, so.
Thank you, Dominic, for bugging me until I listened to Theater of War. I'm definitely going to listen to it again. It's incredibly emotional, and it ended up making me cry, basically. So, and I think that that's important, is to experience emotions, and, made me think about my father and how I hadn't maybe processed some of the stuff that I had experienced when I lost him. And so, do listen to it. It is very valuable. When you think about Star Wars, think about why these things are calling out to you. Think about why they are saying certain things to you emotionally. Listen to your feelings. Stretch out with your feelings. Star Wars is literally telling you what to do. All right, Dominic, where can people find you online if they are looking for you?
They can find me on Twitter. It's basically just type my name in. It's very difficult for me to pronounce, so it's DOMINIKKULCS
And I will link to it as well in the liner notes, which attend the podcast and the YouTube video. Thanks for hanging out with us for a little while. This was a pretty heady topic.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. It means a lot.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is the What the Force theme, orchestral music by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We like to thank all our patrons, especially those that love What the Force, Night Huntress in Wild Space, Susan, and Jessica. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube, or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or other pod apps. It helps other people find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at What the Force Show, on Facebook at What the Force Podcast, or on our website at whattheforce.ca. Feel free to reach out and start a conversation. Cheers.